Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a knight of the Round Table beside King Arthur? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of controlled chaos, a discordant orchestra of screaming civilians, roaring flames, and the percussive, ground-shaking impacts of quirks colliding. Mizurufu, Japan, was a canvas of concrete and glass, and today, a villain was painting it with destruction. Izuku Midoriya, known to the world as the hero Deku, was a vibrant green bolt of lightning streaking through the gray cacophony. Everyone, fall back. Create a perimeter. Ida's voice, amplified by his helmet, cut through the din with practiced authority. Uraraka, focus on evacuating the west side of the plaza. The structure is unstable. Izuku didn't need the command. His body was already moving, one for all thrumming beneath his skin like a caged star. He activated full cowling at 35%, the familiar viridian energy crackling around him, tracing the lines of his hero costume. He was a comet of focused intent, his mind a supercomputer processing 1,000 variables at once. The villain called himself Rift Maker. His quirk was as unsubtle as his name. He wasn't creating portals, not in the clean, precise way Kurojiiri had. He was tearing the air. Each gesture of his hands ripped open a shimmering, unstable fissure in reality, a wound in space that spat out concussive force or sucked in debris with terrifying veracity. His range is approximately 15 meters. Izuku muttered, his voice a low, rapid hum audible only to himself. The tears are erratic, lasting only a few seconds, but the force they expel is significant. He seems to be aiming for structural weaknesses to maximize collateral damage. It's not about precision, it's about sowing chaos. A frontal assault is too risky. He could open a rift right on top of you. He shot forward, a blur of motion. A car, tossed by a previous blast, was hurtling towards a group of civilians huddled behind a toppled bus. Izuku adjusted his trajectory mid-air, his boots skidding on the asphalt for a fraction of a second before he launched himself upwards. He caught the vehicle's bumper with a reinforced kick, his chute style redirecting its momentum skyward where it crashed harmlessly into the facade of an already evacuated office building. He landed in a crouch, scanning the battlefield. He saw Rift Maker, a man in a garish purple and black bodysuit, laughing maniacally as he tore another gash in the air. This one was different. It wasn't a violent explosion or a vacuum. It shimmered with a sickly, rainbow-like oil slick pattern. It looked wrong, unstable, like reality itself was curdling around the edges. A child had tripped, falling away from her mother's frantic grasp, right in the path of the shimmering tear. There was no time for analysis. No time for a plan. There was only the instinct, the core programming of his very soul that screamed, "Save her. Manchester smash!" He yelled, bringing his leg down in a devastating axe kick not on the villain, but on the pavement beside the child. The ground buckled, shattering into a spiderweb of cracks. The shockwave kicked up a cloud of dust and debris, simultaneously shoving the girl back towards her mother and momentarily obscuring Riftmaker's line of sight. It was the opening he needed. He propelled himself forward, closing the distance in a heartbeat. But Riftmaker was faster than he looked. The villain twisted, his eyes wide with frantic glee, and thrust his hand forward, not at Izuku, but just behind him, at the spot where the child had been. The shimmering, oily rift blossomed into existence. Izuku's hero training screamed at him to dodge, to use his speed to evade the unknown effect. But his heart roared louder. He couldn't risk the tear expanding or shifting. He had to end this now. He pushed his body, twisting in midair to deliver a final, decisive blow. He was too late. Not to save the child, she was already safe. But he was too late to save himself. The edge of the reality tear clipped his back. It wasn't a sensation of pain. It was a sensation of unbeing. He felt a violent, wrenching pull, as if his entire existence was a tapestry and a single, divine thread had just been yanked free. The sound of the city, the heat of the flames, the frantic shouts of his friends, it all dissolved into an overwhelming roar of white noise. His vision fractured into a million kaleidoscopic shards, each one showing a different, impossible reality. A sky of fire, an ocean of stars, a city made of crystal, a forest of impossible size. He felt his body being pulled apart atom by atom and simultaneously slammed back together in the wrong order. It was an agony that transcended the physical. He tried to scream, but he had no lungs. He tried to fight, but he had no limbs. He was pure consciousness adrift in a sea of cosmic chaos, the vestiges of one for all howling in his soul like a storm trapped in a bottle. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. Blackness. Silence. Oblivion. Consciousness returned not as a sudden jolt, but as a slow, creeping tide. The first thing he registered was the scent. It was rich, loamy, and alive. The smell of damp earth after a rain, of decaying leaves, of 1,000 different kinds of moss and a sweet, floral fragrance he couldn't name. It was cleaner, purer, than any air he had ever breathed. The second thing was the sound. A gentle, whispering breeze rustled leaves high above, a sound so vast and all-encompassing it was almost a form of silence. A bird, somewhere in the distance, sang a melody he had never heard before, a complex trill that echoed in the quiet air. There were no cars. No sirens. No distant city hum. Izuka's eyes fluttered open. He was staring up at a ceiling of impossible height, a dense canopy of green and gold leaves so thick it blotted out the sky. Sunlight, where it managed to pierce through, fell in great, ethereal shafts, illuminating dust motes and tiny insects dancing in the air. He was lying on a bed of impossibly soft, emerald-green moss. He sat up with a groan, his head pounding. A wave of vertigo washed over him, and he squeezed his eyes shut. The after-effects of the rift. It felt like the worst quirk hangover of his life. He took stock of himself. His hero costume, his durable gamma suit, was torn in several places. The reinforced plating on his right shoulder was cracked, and a long gash ran down his left leg, though the skin beneath was only bruised, a testament to the suit's quality. He patted his utility belt. Most of his pouches were intact. He pulled out his comms unit, a small device fitted into his cowl. He pressed the activation button. Nothing. Not even static. It was completely dead, the internal circuitry fried. Okay, think, he whispered, his voice hoarse. He forced himself to his feet, leaning against the trunk of a colossal tree. The bark was rough and ancient, covered in lichens that seemed to glow with a faint, silvery light. Every tree around him was a titan, their trunks wider than a car, their branches reaching for a sky he couldn't see. This wasn't a park. This wasn't any forest he had ever seen in Japan. Am I still in Japan? The question hung in the silent air. He looked at his hands, flexing his fingers. He could feel one for all simmering inside him, a familiar warmth in the pit of his stomach. He activated full cowling at a mere 5%. The green lightning crackled to life, dancing over his arms. The power was still there. That was a relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. Whatever had happened, it hadn't taken his quirk. It hadn't taken his connection to All Might and the other vestiges. He took a deep breath of the strange, clean air and started walking. He had to find a landmark, a road, a sign of civilization. He chose a direction at random and moved forward, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of moss and leaves. Hours seemed to pass. The forest was unchanging, a beautiful but terrifyingly monotonous labyrinth of giant trees and dappled light. The silence began to feel oppressive, amplifying his sense of isolation. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of his analytical mind. Was this the villain's quirk? Had he been transported to a pocket dimension? An illusion? He pinched his arm hard. The pain was real. He scraped his glove against the rough bark of a tree. The sensation was real. The cool, damp air on his face was real. This wasn't an illusion. This was a place. A very real, very unknown place. Just as a sliver of genuine despair began to set in, he heard it. Faintly at first, then growing louder. It was the sound of shouting. And then, the unmistakable, brutal clang of steel on steel. Hope surged through him, sharp and desperate. He broke into a run, his body instinctively weaving through the ancient trees. The sounds grew more distinct, the guttural snarl of something inhuman, a man's pained cry, and another voice, clear and commanding, shouting orders in a language that was almost Japanese. No, it was something else, something older, but his mind, perhaps through some residual effect of the rift, was translating it. He burst through a thicket of ferns and froze, his eyes widening at the scene before him. In a small, sun-dappled clearing, a group of men were fighting for their lives. They were clad in gleaming metal armor, intricately engraved and polished to a mirror shine. They wore chain-mail coifs under their helms and carried large, kite-shaped shields painted with strange emblems. Their swords were long and broad, wielded with a practiced, powerful grace. They were knights from a storybook, and they were being slaughtered. Their assailants were a pack of monstrous beasts that defied easy description. They were shaped like wolves, but they were far too large, each one the size of a pony. Their fur was the color of midnight, a matted, oily black that seemed to drink the light around them, making their forms appear indistinct and shadowy at the edges. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent, crimson light, and their claws, thick and black as obsidian, tore through steel plate as if it were parchment. One of the knights, a large man with a boar crest on his helmet, was trying to fend off two of the creatures. He blocked a snapping jaw with his shield, the impact sending a deep gong through the clearing, but the other beast lunged, its claws screeching as they raked across his breastplate, leaving deep gouges. Another knight was already down, his leg caught in the jaws of a shadow wolf that was shaking him like a rag doll. "Sir Bors!" "To me!" A man with a regal bearing and a golden dragon emblazoned on his shield shouted. He moved with a fluid lethality that set him apart from the others, his sword a blur of silver light. He parried a lunge and thrust his blade deep into a creature's flank. The beast yelped, a sound like grinding stone, and stumbled back, black, tar-like blood oozing from the wound. This had to be their leader. "Curse this foul sorcery!" The knight with the boar crest bellowed, shoving a wolf back with his shield. "These are no mere beasts, Sir Lancelot." "Lancelot?" The name jolted Izuku. "Lancelot. Sir Bors. Like from the legends of King Arthur." It couldn't be. It was impossible. A shared delusion? A theme park gone horribly wrong? His internal debate was cut short as two more of the shadow wolves burst from the trees, flanking the beleaguered knights. Their situation had gone from dire to hopeless. Izuku didn't think. He didn't weigh the possibilities or analyze the geopolitical ramifications of interfering in what might be a different time period or dimension. He saw people in trouble. He saw monsters, and he had the power to help. The choice was never a choice at all. He pushed off the ground, activating full cowling at 30%. The world dissolved into a green-tinted blur. To the knights, it was as if a bolt of summer lightning had just struck the clearing. One moment, they were bracing for their end. The next, a flash of emerald light and a sound like a miniature thunderclap. A strange figure landed between them and the fresh wave of beasts. He wore no armor, only a bizarre green and black outfit that seemed to be made of some unknown fabric. His hair was a wild mess of dark green, and his face, youthful and set with fierce determination, was framed by a strange metal guard. Green energy, like captured starlight, arced and danced across his entire body. "What in God's name?" "Sir Kay," the knight with the boar crest stammered, his sword arm lowering an inch in sheer disbelief. Izuku ignored him. His focus was absolute. Two wolves lunged at him simultaneously. He dropped into a low stance, his movements impossibly fast. He spun, his right leg lashing out in a controlled arc. St. Louis smash! His foot, reinforced by his iron-soled boot, connected with the first wolf's ribs. It wasn't a cutting or piercing blow, it was a pure, concussive impact. The knights heard a sickening crack, like a great tree branch snapping, and the massive beast was launched sideways, tumbling through the air for a dozen feet before crashing into a tree with enough force to shake its ancient branches. It lay still, its shadowy form flickering. The second wolf was on him, jaws snapping for his throat. Izuku's left arm shot out. From his wrist, 5 tendrils of pure, solid black energy erupted. They were not smoke or shadow, but tangible, whip-like appendages that moved with a mind of their own. Sir Kay flinched back, a cry of dark magic on his lips. The tendrils, his quirk black whip, wrapped around the wolf's neck and forelegs in an instant. Izuku gritted his teeth, planting his feet. With a sharp tug, he ripped the creature off its feet and slammed it into the ground with bone-jarring force. The beast let out a choked whimper and lay stunned. Lancelot could only stare. He was the greatest swordsman in all of Christendom. He had faced down Saxon berserkers, Pictish raiders, and even a wyvern in the mountains of Gwynedd. He had seen Merlin weave spells that could turn the air to fire. But he had never seen anything like this. This boy, he moved with a speed that defied the eye. He fought not with a weapon, but with his very body, striking with the force of a siege engine. And those living shadows that erupted from his arm, it was terrifying, and beautiful, and utterly alien. Izuku didn't pause. He saw the knight on the ground, his legs still trapped. He leaped, the green energy flaring. He landed beside the struggling man, bringing his heel down on the shadow wolf's spine. The creature convulsed and went limp. "Are you all right?" Izuku asked, his voice strained with exertion, the foreign words tumbling out with an accent the knights had never heard. The knight, Sir Bedivere, could only look up with wide, terrified eyes, unable to form a response. The alpha of the pack, a beast even larger than the others with a jagged scar across its muzzle, let out a furious howl. It ignored the cowering knights and charged straight for the green interloper who had decimated its pack. "Behind you, boy!" Lancelot shouted, finding his voice at last as he shook off his stupor. Izuku was already turning. He met the charge head-on. The wolf was a wave of black fur and gnashing teeth. Izuku slid low, the creature's claws tearing through the air where his head had been. He pushed all the power he could safely manage into his legs. Delaware smash, air force. He flicked his fingers, unleashing a cannon blast of compressed air. It wasn't one of his stronger attacks, but at point-blank range, it was devastating. The air bullet struck the alpha wolf in the chest, lifting the half-ton creature off its feet and sending it crashing backward into the undergrowth. The clearing fell silent, save for the pained whimpers of the remaining, wounded wolves. The surviving creatures, their pack broken and their alpha defeated, turned and fled back into the shadows of the forest. The battle was over. It had lasted less than a minute since the green boy had appeared. Izuku stood in the center of the clearing, his chest heaving. The green lightning of full cowling flickered and died, the sudden drain on his system hitting him all at once. The world tilted violently. The adrenaline that had sustained him vanished, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The fight with Rift Maker, the trauma of the dimensional tear, the hours of panicked wandering, and now this sudden, violent confrontation, it was too much. Black spots danced in his vision. The faces of the armored men swam before him, their expressions a mixture of awe, suspicion, and utter bewilderment. He saved us," a younger knight whispered, sounding dazed. "With witchcraft," Sir Kay retorted, though his voice lacked its usual blustering confidence. He gestured with his sword at Izuku. "Did you not see the shadows he commanded? He is a sorcerer." Lancelot stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Izuku. He saw no malice in the boy's posture, only exhaustion. He saw the torn, strange clothing, the youthful face now pale and slick with sweat. He saw the way the boy's shoulders slumped, his entire body trembling with the aftershock of his own power. This was not the fearsome warlock Sir Kay described. This was a boy, a powerful and strange boy, who had just saved all their lives. "Hold your tongue, Kay," Lancelot commanded, his voice low but carrying an authority that silenced the larger man instantly. He took another step towards Izuku, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, not as a threat, but as a habit. "Who are you, boy?" he asked, his voice softer now. "From what court do you hail?" Izuku tried to answer. He opened his mouth, but only a faint gasp escaped. His legs gave out. The world dissolved into a gray haze. He was vaguely aware of the hard, mossy ground rushing up to meet him before everything went dark. He collapsed in a heap in the center of the clearing, an unconscious splash of green and black against the ancient earth. Lancelot rushed to his side, kneeling to check for a pulse. It was strong and steady. He looked at the boy's face, so young and peaceful in its forced slumber. Then he looked at the carnage around them, the massive, broken bodies of the shadow wolves. Creatures that had nearly bested 5 of the realm's finest knights had been dispatched in moments by this single, unarmed youth. Sir Bedivere, limping heavily but alive, came to stand beside him. "Sir Lancelot? What is he?" Lancelot stared at the strange hero, 1,000 questions warring in his mind. He was a mystery, an impossibility, a wielder of lightning and shadow, a warrior with the strength of a giant, and a boy no older than a squire. He was a paradox that had just fallen out of the sky and saved them all. There was only one person in the kingdom who might be able to unravel such a riddle. Lancelot carefully gathered the unconscious boy into his arms. Izuku was surprisingly light. "He is the realm's concern now," he said, his voice filled with a certainty that left no room for argument. "We take him to Camelot. The king must see this." A dull, rhythmic throbbing at the base of his skull was the first herald of Izuku's return to consciousness. It was a slow, painful crawl out of a bottomless, black well. He felt heavy. His limbs were leaden, his eyelids fused shut. For a long, blissful moment, he remembered nothing, floating in a sea of comfortable oblivion. Then, like a crack of lightning, the memories returned in a chaotic flood: Rift Maker, the sickening tear in reality, the ancient forest, the gleaming nights, the monstrous shadow wolves, and the bone-deep exhaustion that had finally claimed him. He wasn't in the forest anymore. The mossy ground had been replaced by a mattress stuffed with what felt like straw, surprisingly comfortable beneath a rough spun wool blanket. The air no longer smelled of damp earth and living trees, but of stone dust, beeswax, and something else, a faint, herby scent like dried lavender. He cracked an eyelid open, a sliver of blurry vision greeting him. He was in a room. The walls were made of massive, uneven blocks of gray stone, slick with a faint dampness that caught the light of a single torch flickering in a wrought iron sconce. The ceiling was low, supported by thick, dark wooden beams. The only source of natural light was a tall, narrow slit of a window, an arrow slit. His analytical mind supplied, through which he could see a sliver of impossibly blue sky. The furniture was sparse and utilitarian. The bed he lay on, a small wooden stool, and a simple basin of water on a three-legged table. He pushed himself into a sitting position, the blanket pooling around his waist. He was still in his hero costume, though the worst of the grime seemed to have been wiped away. His boots and gauntlets had been removed and placed neatly by the bed. His body ached, but it was the deep, satisfying ache of muscular exertion, not injury. The poison, the dimensional sickness, whatever had been plaguing him felt distant, a phantom echo. Panic, a familiar and unwelcome companion, began its icy ascent up his spine. This was real. He had been captured, or rescued, by men in medieval armor. He was in a castle. The impossibility of it all was so overwhelming it threatened to short-circuit his brain. He had to stay calm. He had to analyze. Okay. First things first. Where am I? Judging by the architecture and the knight's armor, this is some approximation of high medieval Europe. But the language was translated in my head, a lingering effect of the quirk? Or is this place just magic? The shadow wolves certainly weren't normal. His mumbling was a soft, frantic whisper in the quiet room. I have no tech, no support. I'm alone. My objective is to find out where, and when I am, and figure out how to get home. Priority 1. Establish if my hosts are friendly. As if summoned by his thoughts, the heavy wooden door creaked open. The man who entered was not a knight. He was old yet ageless. His long hair and beard were the color of freshly fallen snow, but his face was remarkably unlined, his skin taut over sharp cheekbones. He wore simple, dark blue robes, unadorned with any embroidery or jewels. But it was his eyes that held Izuku captive. They were a startling, pale shade of violet, and they swirled with an ancient light, like looking into a deep nebula. They seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries, and a spark of something else, a profound, mischievous curiosity. He carried no weapon, but he moved with an aura of power that was more potent than any drawn sword. Ah, the old man said, his voice a calm, melodic baritone that seemed to hum in the very stone of the room. The little storm has awoken. I am pleased. For a moment there, we feared your inner fire might have consumed you. Izuku instinctively shuffled back on the bed, his muscles tensing for a fight. Who are you? Where am I? The man smiled, a gentle, knowing expression that did nothing to soothe Izuku's nerves. So many questions. The mark of a keen mind. I am called Merlin, and you are within the walls of Camelot, the fortress of King Arthur Pendragon. You are a guest here, young one. A very curious guest. Merlin? Camelot? King Arthur? Izuku's mind reeled. The names were a sledgehammer blow of impossibility. This wasn't just a place that looked like the Middle Ages. He was in the legend, a story his own mother had read to him as a child. A foundational myth of Western civilization. It was too absurd, too insane to be real. This had to be an elaborate hallucination, a coma dream induced by the villain's quirk. Merlin seemed to read the disbelief on his face. He glided closer to the bed, his movements unnervingly silent. Your mind struggles to plant roots in this reality. I can feel it. It is as if you are a seed from a different forest entirely, dropped onto foreign soil. You are untethered from this world's loom. He raised a hand, his long, pale fingers outstretched. Izuku flinched, but the hand stopped a few inches from his forehead. A soft, golden light, warm and gentle as a summer sunrise, bloomed from Merlin's palm. Izuku felt the light wash over him, and with it, the last vestiges of his headache and fatigue simply dissolved. It was not like Recovery Girl's quirk, which felt like a violent rewinding of biological processes. This felt like life itself, a pure, clean energy that soothed him down to his very cells. As the magic touched him, Izuku felt something stir deep within him. One for all. It resonated with the golden light, a low thrum of power that was not aggressive, but aware. The vestiges, the echoes of the previous users, seemed to lean forward in his soul, observing this strange new energy with a collective, silent curiosity. Merlin's eyes widened, the violet depths swirling with sudden, intense fascination. He drew his hand back as if he touched a hot coal, though his expression was one of wonder, not pain. By the lady, he breathed, his voice laced with awe. What are you? He wasn't looking at Izuku's face, but rather through him, at something deeper. It is not one soul I sense within you, but a tapestry, a legacy. A choir of spirits, all woven into a single, brilliant thread. A burning torch passed through generations, each hand adding to its flame. I have never felt its like. Izuku stared, speechless. No one had ever been able to perceive one for all like that. Not even All for One, with his myriad of quirks, had ever described it so poetically, so accurately. This man, Merlin, could see the vestiges. I don't understand. Izuku managed, his voice barely a whisper. Merlin's focus returned to him, his ancient eyes sharp and analytical. No, I suppose you wouldn't. Forgive my intrusion. Your power, it is a song the world has not heard before. He straightened up, his composure regained. King Arthur wishes to have an audience with you. Sir Lancelot will escort you. It would be wise to answer his questions as truthfully as you are able. The unspoken addendum hung in the air. Your life may depend on it. Merlin gave him a final, unreadable look before turning and sweeping out of the room, leaving Izuku alone with his racing heart and the scent of old magic. A few minutes later, the door opened again. This time it was the knight from the forest, the one called Lancelot. Without his helm, Izuku could see his face clearly. He was handsome in a rugged, classical way, with a strong jaw, dark, brooding eyes, and black hair that curled slightly at his collar. His expression was one of stoic neutrality, but Izuku's analytical gaze caught the flicker of deep-seated curiosity in his eyes. You are awake, Lancelot stated. It wasn't a question. He gestured to Izuku's gauntlets and boots. Can you walk? Yes. Yes, sir, Izuku stammered, quickly pulling on his gear. Standing up, he felt a bit ridiculous. His green and black hero costume, designed for agility and support in a modern cityscape, looked utterly alien against the backdrop of ancient stone and the knight's gleaming steel. Lancelot's eyes scanned his attire, lingering for a moment on the strange metal plates and the odd, rabbit ear-like appendages of his cowl. He said nothing, merely turned. Follow me. And a word of advice, boy. In the king's presence, you speak only when spoken to. Izuku nodded mutely and followed him out of the room. The castle was a living, breathing entity. The corridor opened into a wider causeway bustling with activity. Men-at-arms with spears and leather jacks nodded respectfully to Lancelot as they passed, their gazes invariably shifting to Izuku, filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. Servants carrying baskets of laundry or platters of bread hurried past, casting nervous, sideways glances at the strange boy in green. From a courtyard below, Izuku could hear the rhythmic clang-clang-clang of a blacksmith's hammer, and the shouts of men engaged in sword practice. The sheer scale of the place was breathtaking. The stone walls were thick enough to repel cannon fire, though cannons probably didn't exist here. Great, colorful tapestries hung on the walls, depicting grand battles, noble hunts, and a beautiful woman rising from a lake holding a sword. The Lady of the Lake, Izuku realized with a jolt. He was a ghost walking through a legend, a piece of science fiction dropped into a fantasy epic. He felt small and terribly out of place, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm against his ribs. Lancelot's silent, imposing presence beside him was both a comfort and a source of intense anxiety. They finally arrived before a set of immense, oak doors banded with iron. 2 guards clad in immaculate plate armor with the golden Pendragon crest on their chests stood as still as statues. At a nod from Lancelot, they opened the doors, the sound groaning through the hall. Izuku stepped inside and his breath caught in his throat. He was in the great hall, and it was a space worthy of a king. The ceiling vaulted high overhead, lost in shadow, from which hung massive iron chandeliers. Sunlight, tinted 100 different colors, streamed through towering stained glass windows that depicted scenes of draconic battles and saintly coronations. Banners bearing the crests of a dozen different noble houses hung from the rafters. But the hall's centerpiece, the feature that drew Izuku's immediate and unwavering attention, was the table. It was a colossal ring of dark, polished wood, so large it could easily seat 30 men. The round table. It was real. A handful of knights were already present, standing or sitting, their conversation ceasing the moment Izuku entered. He recognized Sir Kay, the boorish knight from the forest, who glared at him with open hostility, and at the far end of the hall, upon a simple but elegant throne of carved oak, sat the king. He was younger than Izuku expected. He couldn't have been much older than Mirio, perhaps in his early 20s. He had fine, golden blonde hair and a clean-shaven jaw. He was not a physically imposing man, yet he radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. He wore a simple golden circlet on his brow, but the true crown was the burden of responsibility that rested so heavily in his clear, blue eyes. Those eyes were young, but they held the weariness of a man who had seen too many battles and made too many difficult choices. This was Arthur Pendragon. Lancelot strode forward and knelt on one knee. "My Lord King! I bring the boy, as you commanded." Arthur's gaze shifted to Izuku. It was an intense, piercing look, not of judgment, but of profound inquiry. "Rise, Lancelot, and bring him forward." Izuku walked forward on shaky legs, stopping a respectful distance from the dais. He remembered the etiquette from historical dramas and gave a short, awkward bow. "We are told you saved some of my best knights from a pack of Gwilgi," Arthur began, his voice clear and resonant, filling the cavernous hall. "We are told you did so with a power the likes of which this court has never seen. Tell us your name, boy." "Izuku Midoriya, sire," he mumbled, then cleared his throat and spoke louder. "My name is Izuku Midoriya." "Izuku," Arthur repeated, tasting the foreign name. "And from what kingdom do you hail? I do not recognize your garb or your accent." This was it. The moment of truth. He took a deep breath. I come from a land called Japan, sire. It is very far away." A murmur rippled through the assembled knights. "I have never heard of this Japan," Sir Kay grumbled from the side. "And this power you wield," Arthur continued, his eyes unwavering. "Merlin calls it a thing of nature, not of shadow. What is it? Is it a form of sorcery?" Here, the ground was even more treacherous. He couldn't explain the science of quirk factors and genetic expression. He had to simplify. "It's a quirk. In my homeland, many people are born with special abilities. We call them quirks. Mine allows me to stockpile and release great amounts of power." He decided to omit the part about it being passed down. That was too complicated, too close to what Merlin had already sensed. The explanation was met with blank, uncomprehending stares. "A quirk?" Arthur repeated slowly. "He speaks in riddles," Sir Kay exploded, stepping forward. "My king, this is folly! He appears from nowhere, clad in pagan green, and wields the power of lightning and living shadow. He speaks of a land none have heard of and powers granted at birth. This is not the work of God, but of a demonic pact. He is a warlock, a creature of Morgan Le Fay sent to infiltrate your court. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and venomous. Several other knights shifted, their hands moving instinctively to the pommels of their swords. Izuku's blood ran cold. He had seen this before, fear of the unknown twisting into hatred. He had lived it his whole life as a quirkless boy, and he had seen it directed at those with so-called villainous quirks. He looked at Arthur, his heart pounding. The young king's face was a mask of calm consideration. He listened to Kay's outburst, then raised a hand, silencing him instantly. He leaned forward on his throne, his blue eyes locking onto Izuku's, cutting through all the noise and suspicion in the hall. "One question, Izuku Midoriya," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a lower, more personal tone. "Forget the strange names and the tales of your homeland. Forget the nature of your power. Tell me only this." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Why did you do it? In the forest, you did not know who my men were. You did not know if they were knights or bandits. You owed them no allegiance. You had nothing to gain, so why did you risk your life to save them?" The hall was utterly silent. Every knight, even Lancelot and the glowering Kay, waited for his answer. This was the true test. Not of his power, but of his character. Izuku looked at the king, and for the first time since waking up in this impossible world, his anxiety melted away, replaced by a simple, unwavering certainty. He was no longer a lost student, or a dimensional anomaly. He was a hero. And the king had asked him a hero's question. He stood up straighter, his voice clear and without a trace of his usual stammer. "Because they needed help," he said simply. He met Arthur's gaze directly, his green eyes earnest and true. Someone was in trouble. They were going to die. When you have the power to do something, you have a responsibility to act. It doesn't matter who they are. It's the right thing to do. It's what a hero does. The words, so simple and yet so profound, echoed in the silent hall. They were the core of his being, the creed gifted to him by All Might, the very soul of One for All. A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. It was a genuine, brilliant smile that transformed his weary, kingly features, making him look like the young man he truly was. It was a smile of recognition, of finding a kindred spirit in the most unlikely of places. He leaned back in his throne, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "A hero," he repeated softly. He looked around at his knights, his blue eyes shining with a newfound conviction. "For a year, I have spoken of a new code for this kingdom. A code of chivalry. That strength should be used not for glory or conquest, but to protect the weak, to uphold justice, and to do what is right, simply because it is right. And here, fate has sent us the living embodiment of that very ideal." Sir Kay looked flabbergasted, his mouth hanging open. Lancelot's stoic expression had softened into one of quiet contemplation, his gaze on Izuku now holding a flicker of newfound respect. Arthur stood from his throne. "You are no warlock, Izuku Midoriya. Your power may be strange, but your heart is true. You are welcome in Camelot." Later that evening, in the king's private solar, the mood was more subdued. A fire crackled in a large stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls which were covered in maps and strategic charts. Arthur stood by the window, staring out at the moonlit castle grounds. Merlin sat in a high-backed chair, his long fingers steepled before him. "You have taken a great risk, Arthur," Merlin said, his voice a low hum. "The court is unsettled. To welcome a boy of such unknown origin and power, it is a bold move." "It was the right move," Arthur countered, turning from the window. His eyes shone with the fervor of his earlier decision. "Did you hear him, Merlin? Not a hint of ambition, not a trace of greed, only a simple, pure desire to help. He is everything I want my knights to be." "His heart is indeed true," Merlin conceded, his ancient eyes fixed on the fire. "Truer than the steel in Excalibur. I do not doubt his intentions. It is his nature that gives me pause. His quirk? That and more," the wizard murmured. "When I touched him with my magic, I felt the power within him. It is not one power, Arthur. It is a legacy, a lineage of 9 souls, each one passing the torch to the next. He is the 9th flame. It is a power built on sacrifice, on the collective will of those who came before him. It is a story far older than this kingdom, and far more complex than he knows. Arthur was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of Merlin's words. So he is more than just a boy born with a strange gift. Far more, Merlin confirmed. He is a vessel for heroes past. That is why his spirit is so strong. He carries their will with him. The wizard looked up, his violet eyes meeting Arthur's. And that is why Morgan will see him as such a threat. Morgan Le Fay deals in power born of ambition, jealousy, and shadow. This boy, his power is born of selflessness. It is anathema to everything she is. She will try to destroy him, or corrupt him. Arthur's jaw tightened. Then we will protect him. You must do more than that, Merlin advised. You must learn from him. His world, for all its strangeness, has codified what you are trying to build. They have a name for it. A hero. He smiled faintly. Keep him close, Arthur. Let his spirit be a beacon to your court. But be wary. A light that shines so brightly casts a very dark shadow. Arthur nodded, his gaze returning to the window. Down below, in the torchlit training yard, he could see a lone figure. It was Izuku, unable to sleep, going through a series of strange, precise katas, kicks and punches that flowed with a disciplined grace. A faint, emerald aura flickered around him with each movement. He was an enigma, a miracle, a potential catastrophe. He was a boy from another world, a hero without a home. And Arthur, king of the Britons, knew with an unshakable certainty that this strange boy's destiny was now intertwined with the fate of Camelot. The days that followed Izuku's audience with the king were a strange and disorienting limbo. He was no longer a prisoner, nor was he truly a guest. He was an anomaly, a living curiosity that the inhabitants of Camelot observed with a mixture of fear, reverence, and outright suspicion. He was given new quarters, a modest but comfortable room in the squire's wing of the castle, and was allowed to wander the grounds freely. Every corridor he walked, every courtyard he crossed, he was trailed by a wake of whispers. That's him, the boy from the woods. They say he commands the storm. Kay swears he's a creature of the Fae, that his skin is made of woven leaves, but he saved Lancelot. The first night does not lie. Izuku did his best to ignore it, focusing on his own internal turmoil. He spent hours in the castle's vast, dusty library, poring over hand-scribed maps and histories of Britain, trying to find any mention of Japan, of Asia, of a world filled with quirks. There was nothing. The world outside the castle walls was one of warring Saxon kingdoms, Pictish tribes in the north, and a fragile Christian faith spreading over ancient pagan roots. He was stranded, a historical and geographical impossibility. His analysis of his situation was bleak. He had no way home. He had no allies save for a cryptic wizard who saw him as a living puzzle and a young king who saw him as a symbol. He was alone, adrift in an age of myth and steel, and the profound loneliness of it was a heavier weight than any training regimen he had ever endured. On the 4th day, a royal page found him in the library. Master Izuku, the boy said, bowing low. King Arthur requests your presence in his solar. Izuku's stomach plummeted. This was it. The curiosity had worn off, and now they were going to banish him, or worse. He imagined being thrown into a dungeon, left to rot for the crime of being different. He followed the page in a state of quiet dread, his mind racing through escape scenarios, tactical retreats, and the potential necessity of using a 5% smash on a castle wall. Arthur's solar was a stark contrast to the grandeur of the Great Hall. It was a space of work and thought. Maps covered a large table, marked with troop movements and territorial lines. Books were stacked on every available surface, and a fire crackled warmly in the hearth, warding off the persistent chill of the stone walls. Arthur was standing by the window, not in his regal robes, but in a simple linen tunic and leather breeches. He looked less like a king and more like a young man burdened by the weight of the world. He turned as Izuku entered, and his face broke into a small, welcoming smile. Izuku. Thank you for coming. Please sit. He gestured to a wooden chair by the fire. Izuku perched nervously on the edge of the seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. You wanted to see me, Your Majesty? I did, Arthur said, moving to stand before the hearth. 4 days I have been thinking about your words in the hall. It's what a hero does. A simple creed, yet it holds more power than any crown or sword. My knights, they are the best warriors in this land. They are brave, they are strong, and most are loyal. But they were raised in a world of violence. They fight for glory, for land, for a lord's favor. I want them to fight for something more. For an idea. The idea of Camelot. He looked at Izuku, his blue eyes intense with conviction. The Round Table is the heart of that idea. A circle of equals, with no head, bound not by fealty alone, but by a shared code, a vow to use their strength for justice, not for gain. You, Izuku Midoriya, arrived here and lived that code without ever having heard it. You are its proof. Izuku's brow furrowed. He didn't understand where this was going. I'm glad I could help, sire. But I'm not, Arthur cut him off gently. That is why I have summoned you. I am not offering you a place in my court as a curiosity or a ward. I am making you an offer. I want you to take a seat at the Round Table. The words hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from his lungs. For a moment, the room swam, the crackling of the fire turning into a deafening roar in his ears. He stared at the king, convinced he had misheard, that the language translation in his head had finally glitched. What? He squeaked, his voice cracking. I want you to become a knight of the Round Table. Arthur repeated, his voice firm. Izuku shot to his feet, his hands waving frantically in front of him in a gesture of panicked negation. No! No, I can't! Your Majesty, you don't understand. I'm not a knight. I'm not noble. I don't own land. I don't even know how to hold a sword correctly. I'm just me. A student from another world. I don't belong here, much less at that table with legends like Sir Lancelot. His heart hammered against his ribs. The honor was so immense, so undeserved, that it felt like a sacrilege. It was like a random person being asked to join the Avengers. He was a fraud, a cosmic accident. He wasn't worthy. The old, familiar voice of his quirkless childhood whispered in his ear, telling him he was nothing special, just a pretender. Arthur listened to his frantic protests with a patient calm. When Izuku finally ran out of breath, the king spoke, his voice gentle but unyielding. I am not asking for a swordsman, Izuku. I have hundreds of those. I am not asking for a nobleman. Their ambitions are often a greater threat than my enemies. I am asking for a hero. Knighthood, in the Camelot I am building, is not a station of birth, but a quality of the soul. It is a commitment. You have already proven you possess that quality in abundance. He stepped closer. You say you do not belong. But a spirit like yours belongs wherever there are people who need protecting. Your world does not matter. Your heart does. Will you accept? Izuku looked into the king's eyes and saw no room for argument. He saw a desperate, idealistic ruler who was placing a tremendous amount of faith in him, a complete stranger. It was reckless. It was inspiring. It was exactly the kind of leap of faith that All Might had taken on him, all those years ago. How could he say no to that? His shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in acceptance of the immense, terrifying weight being placed upon them. I accept, Your Majesty, he whispered, the words feeling alien on his tongue. Arthur's smile was like the sun breaking through the clouds. Excellent. The ceremony will be tonight. That evening, the great hall was transformed. Every torch was lit, casting the vast space in a warm, flickering glow that made the polished armor of the assembled knights gleam like liquid gold. The court was out in full force, the nobles in their finest silks and velvets, their chatter a low hum of anticipation and disbelief. At the center of it all, before the dais, stood Izuku Midoriya. He felt intensely vulnerable. He was not wearing his hero costume, which had been taken to be mended. Instead, a royal tailor had crafted him a new garment. It was a simple, practical tunic of a deep, forest green wool, sleeveless to allow for the full range of his movements. It was comfortable, but offered no protection. The only adornment was on the chest, the stylized golden dragon of the Pendragon crest, stitched in vibrant thread. He looked less like a warrior and more like a royal forester. The other knights who were to be formally inducted into the new order of the Round Table stood nearby, Sir Gawain, Sir Bedivere, Sir Bors, and others. They were giants of men, clad head to toe in engraved steel, their swords at their hips, their expressions proud and solemn. Izuku, by contrast, was an island of green humility in a sea of metallic pride. A hush fell over the hall as King Arthur rose from his throne. In his hands he held the most famous sword in all of Christendom. Excalibur. It seemed to shine with its own inner light, the cross-guard glittering with jewels, the blade a length of polished, lethal moonlight. "We are gathered here to forge a new future," Arthur announced, his voice ringing with purpose. "An age not of might making right, but of might serving right. The men who kneel before you tonight are the first pillars of this new age. They will swear an oath, not just to me as their king, but to the very soul of Camelot." One by one, the other knights knelt, recited their vows, and were dubbed by the king. Then, it was Izuku's turn. He walked forward on trembling legs and knelt on the cold stone floor before his new king. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, a physical pressure on his back. "Izuku Midoriya," Arthur said, his voice softer now, yet still carrying through the silent hall. "You have no lands to pledge, no noble lineage to offer this court. Do you still wish to swear the oath?" "I do, your majesty," Izuku said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Then repeat the vows." "Vow to never outrage nor murder, and to always flee treason." "I vow to never outrage nor murder," Izuku repeated, the ancient words feeling heavy and sacred. "And to always flee treason. Vow to give mercy unto him that asketh mercy, upon pain of forfeiture of your worship and lordship of King Arthur forevermore. I vow to give mercy unto him that asketh mercy." The sentiment resonated deep within him. It was the heart of heroism. "And always," Arthur continued, his eyes locking with Izuku's, "to all ladies, damsels, and gentlewomen, to give succor, upon pain of death. And lastly, never to take up a battle and a wrongful quarrel, for no law nor for no world's goods. I will always give succor to those in need," Izuku vowed, adapting the words slightly to fit his own broader creed. "And I will never fight for a wrongful cause," Arthur nodded, satisfied. He raised Excalibur. The legendary blade seemed to hum in the air. He gently touched the flat of the blade to Izuku's right shoulder. "Be without fear in the face of your enemies." He moved it to his left shoulder. "Be brave and upright that God may love thee." He lifted the sword high. "Speak the truth, always, even if it leads to your death." Finally, he rested the blade on Izuku's head, and the cold weight of it felt like a crown of responsibility. "Safeguard the helpless and do no wrong. This is your oath." Arthur's voice boomed. "Fulfill it, and arise." "Arise, Sir Izuku, the Emerald Knight of the Round Table." Izuku rose to his feet, his mind a whirlwind. Sir Izuku, the Emerald Knight. It was real. A ripple of polite, if slightly stunned, applause went through the court. He looked over at the other knights. Lancelot gave him a curt, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Gawain offered a broad, encouraging grin. Sir Kay, however, looked as though he had just swallowed a particularly sour lemon. He had a title. He had a place. Now, he had to prove he deserved it. Proving he deserved it turned out to be far more difficult, and humiliating, than he had imagined. His training as a knight began the very next morning, and it was a catastrophic failure on all fronts. His first lesson was horsemanship, conducted by a gruff, exasperated stable master named Owain. Izuku had seen horses in pictures and on television, but he had never been this close to one. The beast assigned to him, a massive, muscular warhorse named Stonewall, seemed to take an immediate and personal dislike to him. "Just swing your leg over, lad. It's like sitting on a bench," Owain grunted. It was not like sitting on a bench. It was like trying to mount a furry, irritable mountain that could shift its topography at will. After his third attempt ended with him sliding ignominiously off the other side and into a pile of hay, Lancelot, who had been watching from the stable door with poorly concealed amusement, decided to intervene. "He is a warhorse, Sir Izuku, not a pony at a country fair," Lancelot said, his lips twitching. "You must show him you are his master." Izuku, brushing straw from his new tunic, did not feel like anyone's master. He tried again, this time managing to heave himself into the saddle. He sat perched precariously, 5 feet higher than he was used to, on the back of a living, breathing creature that smelled strongly of hay and disapproval. Now, just a gentle kick to urge him on, Lancelot instructed. Izuku gave Stonewall a tentative nudge with his heels. The horse responded by taking exactly 1 step forward and then stopping to munch on a nearby bale of hay, pointedly ignoring him. The entire stable yard of squires and stable hands erupted into laughter. Izuku's face burned with a shame so intense it could have forged steel. His day ended with him being led around the paddock like a child, clinging desperately to the saddle horn, while Stonewall ambled along with an air of profound boredom. The etiquette lessons were even worse. That evening, he attended his first formal dinner as a knight. The table was a bewildering landscape of silver goblets, pewter plates, and an array of knives and spoons. There were no forks. He watched the others, trying to mimic how they speared chunks of roast boar with their daggers and tore bread with their hands. He managed to send a roasted turnip flying across the table, narrowly missing the ear of a visiting baroness, and later tipped a goblet of red wine all over his own lap, staining his green tunic a muddy purple. He spent the entire meal in a state of mumbled, mortified apology. But the true nadir of his knightly education came in the training yard. He was handed a sword. It was a blunted practice weapon, but it felt impossibly heavy and clumsy in his hands, a far cry from the perfectly balanced support gear he was used to. "Show us your form, Sir Izuku," said the master-at-arms, a scarred veteran named Sir Ector. Izuku stood before a wooden training pell, a thick post carved roughly into the shape of a man. He tried to mimic the stances he had seen the other knights use. He swung the sword. It was an awkward, off-balance blow that glanced off the wood with a dull thud, sending a painful vibration up his arm. The watching squires snickered. He tried again, a desperate, two-handed heave that nearly sent him spinning to the ground. He was a hero who could shatter concrete with a single kick, a warrior who could move faster than a striking snake, and he couldn't make a dent in a wooden post with a sword. The irony was galling. It was on the 3rd day of this public humiliation that things came to a head. Sir Gawain, the king's own nephew, approached him in the yard. Gawain was a mountain of a man, renowned for his good nature and his almost supernatural strength, which was said to wax and wane with the sun. "Sir Izuku," Gawain boomed, his voice cheerful. "The men are saying you have the strength of 10, yet you cannot swing a blade. I confess, my curiosity is piqued. I would test your mettle myself. A friendly spar, what say you?" A crowd of knights and squires immediately gathered, eager for the spectacle. This was it. The moment of truth. "I accept, Sir Gawain," Izuku said, his heart beginning to pound. "But I will not use a sword." A murmur of confusion went through the crowd. Gawain raised a blond eyebrow. "Unarmed? Against me? That is either very brave or very foolish, my friend. We will see," Izuku replied, a flicker of his old, analytical fire returning to his eyes. They took their places in the center of the dusty training ring. Gawain, bare-chested under the midday sun, swung his massive, blunted great sword in a lazy arc, the air whistling with its passage. Izuku shed his tunic, leaving him in his simple undershirt and breeches. He settled into his familiar shoot-style stance, his body low to the ground, his senses sharp. "Have at you!" Gawain roared and charged. The charge was like a rockslide, an avalanche of pure power. Gawain's sword came down in a brutal, vertical chop meant to shatter a shield and the man behind it. But Izuku was no longer there. He activated full cowling at a controlled 15%. To the onlookers, he simply vanished. One moment he was in the path of the sword, the next he was standing 3 feet to the left, completely untouched, his expression one of intense concentration. Gawain grunted, surprised, and spun, his sword scything horizontally at waist level. Izuku leaped, flipping gracefully over the blade, and landed silently behind the larger knight. Incredible strength and speed for a man his size. Izuku's mind raced, his characteristic mumbling now a silent, internal monologue. But his technique relies on overwhelming force. His swings are wide, powerful arcs. He overcommits to every blow, leaving himself open for 0.8 seconds after each full swing. His footwork is heavy, planted. He's a fortress, not a fencer. Stand and fight, you phantom! Gawain bellowed, a hint of frustration in his voice. He launched into a furious combination of strikes, the great sword a blur of deadly steel. Izuku didn't attack. He just moved. He was a leaf on the wind, a water strider on a pond. He flowed around Gawain's offense, ducking, weaving, and sliding. His movements were so fluid, so impossibly fast, that it ceased to look like a fight and began to look like a dance. The crowd fell silent, their mockery turning to slack-jawed astonishment. They were watching a force of nature contend with a bastion of strength, and the bastion couldn't land a single blow. Finally, Gawain, panting from the exertion, swung wildly. Izuku saw his opening. As the sword reached the apex of its arc, Izuku darted in. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't launch a kick. He simply ran past Gawain, and as he did, he reached out and tapped the knight gently on his exposed back. He came to a stop 10 feet away, turning to face him. The message was unspoken but deafeningly clear. If I had been holding a dagger, you would be dead. Gawain froze mid-swing, his back tingling where the boy had touched him. He slowly lowered his sword, his chest heaving. A slow grin spread across his face. By the gods, you truly are as fast as they say. I am not done, Izuku said softly. He dropped back into his stance. Again, Gawain's grin widened. With pleasure! This time, Gawain was more cautious. His swings were tighter, more controlled. He was no fool. He was adapting. He lunged forward with a powerful thrust. Izuku sidestepped, and, in the same motion, flicked the fingers of his right hand. Delaware Smash. Air Force. A tiny, focused cannonball of compressed air, only 5% of its usual power, struck the ground right in front of Gawain's leading foot. It wasn't enough to harm him, but it was enough to kick up a spray of dirt and disrupt his balance for a fraction of a second. It was all the time Izuku needed. He surged forward, a blur of green. He ducked under Gawain's flailing arm and brought the knife edge of his hand down in a short, sharp chop against the knight's thick wrist. There was a loud thwack. Gawain cried out in surprise more than pain, his fingers going numb. The great sword, freed from his grasp, clattered to the dust of the training yard. Silence. The entire yard was frozen, speechless. Sir Gawain, the Sun Knight, the indomitable champion of Camelot, stood disarmed and defeated by an unarmed boy in an undershirt. Izuku stood panting lightly, the faint green aura of full cowling fading from his skin. Gawain stared at his empty hand, then at Izuku, then at his sword lying in the dirt. A deep, booming laugh suddenly erupted from his chest. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated shock and delight. Ha! Ha! Well, I'll be damned! He strode over to Izuku and clapped him on the shoulder with a hand the size of a dinner plate, nearly sending the smaller boy to his knees. You beat me! You beat me without laying a scratch on me. What devilry is that? It's just my quirk, Izuku mumbled, his confidence evaporating now that the fight was over. I don't know what a quirk is, Gawain boomed, retrieving his sword. But I know a true warrior when I see one. You may not be a knight in the way we understand, Sir Izuku, but you are a warrior worthy of the Round Table. He turned to the still silent crowd. Did you all see that? This is our new brother, the Emerald Knight. A hesitant applause started, which soon grew into a wave of genuinely impressed cheers and shouts. The knights and squires surged forward, patting Izuku on the back, their expressions no longer filled with suspicion, but with a newfound, profound respect. They had seen his power not as a terrifying burst of magic in a dark forest, but as a disciplined, controlled, and undeniable martial skill. From the edge of the yard, Lancelot watched with a small, approving smile. This strange boy was more than just a symbol. He was a new kind of power, a new kind of strength. Later, as the sun began to set, Izuku sat alone on the battlements, looking out over the sprawling countryside. He held his new green tunic in his hands, tracing the golden dragon of the Pendragon crest with his finger. He was still a lost boy from another world. He still desperately missed his home, his mother, his friends. But as he looked at the crest, he no longer felt like a complete fraud. He couldn't ride a horse, he couldn't swing a sword, and he didn't belong. But he was strong. He was a hero. And here, in this impossible land of myth and steel, He had just earned his place. He was Sir Izuku, the Emerald Knight. And he had a feeling his work was just beginning. Izuku's new life in Camelot settled into a strange rhythm, a delicate dance between the utterly mundane and the profoundly mythical. Mornings were spent in the training yard, where he had become an odd sort of instructor. He could not teach a man how to use a sword, but he could teach them about footwork, balance, and situational awareness with a clarity that left even the most seasoned veterans impressed. He would spar with knights, a whirlwind of green evasion, his objective never to defeat them but to show them the openings in their own form. The mockery had ceased entirely, replaced by a grudging, and in some cases, enthusiastic respect. Afternoons were for study, for trying to reconcile his scientific worldview with a land governed by magic and faith. He learned of the old religion from Merlin, who spoke of the earth and sky as living things, and of the new Christian god from the castle's chaplain, a kindly old man named Father Michael. To Izuku, it was all data, new variables in an impossible equation. He was a hero in a world without a hero society, a scientist in an age of superstition. But it was during the formal sessions of the Round Table that he felt the true weight of his new title. He sat in his designated chair, a simple oaken seat carved with his new epithet, the Emerald Knight, feeling like a child wearing his father's armor. He listened as the knights gave reports of Saxon raids, of disputes between feudal lords, of monstrous beasts sighted in the wild fens. He rarely spoke, his mind whirring to process this new form of worldly trouble, so different from the quirk-related incidents of his home. He was an observer, a student, until the day the old Reeve arrived from the west. The man's name was Alaric. He was stooped with age and worry, his face a road map of hardship. He knelt before the round table, his hands trembling as he clutched a gnarled walking staff. "My Lord King," he began, his voice raspy with disuse and fear. "I am the Reeve of Oakhaven, a village nestled on the edge of the Whisperwood. For generations that wood has been our provider. But no longer. A blight has fallen upon it," Sir Kay snorted. "A blight? You petition the king over a poor harvest? It is no common blight, Sir Knight," Alaric insisted, his pale eyes wide with terror. "The trees, they are dying from the inside out. Their leaves turn to gray dust, their branches grow brittle, the birds have fallen silent. The river runs sluggish and black. It is as if life itself is being leached from the land." A somber mood fell over the table. Arthur leaned forward, his expression serious. "And your people, Reeve Alaric?" The old man's face crumpled. "A wasting sickness has taken hold, my king. It begins as a deep weariness, a slumber from which it is hard to wake. Then the color drains from their skin. They do not die, not yet, they simply fade. They become ghosts in their own homes. We fear we are all cursed, that the very soul of our village is being devoured." He looked around the table, his gaze desperate. "There is a legend, of a walking shadow with eyes of fire, a thing of root and bone that stalks the silent woods. The whispers on the wind say it is the cause. Please, my king, send us a champion." Arthur sat back, his gaze sweeping over his knights. This was not a task for an army. It was a task for a hero. His eyes fell first on Sir Lancelot, his greatest warrior, the Sword of Camelot. Then, his gaze shifted, landing on the young man in the green tunic. On the boy who spoke of saving people. "This is a foul and unnatural business," Arthur declared. "A task requiring both the finest sword in my kingdom and a mind that can look beyond the simple act of killing." He stood, his voice ringing with authority. "Sir Lancelot du Lac, Sir Izuku, the Emerald Knight, I charge the two of you with this quest. Ride to Oakhaven, discover the source of this blight, and put an end to it. The life of that village is in your hands." Lancelot rose, bowed crisply, and said, "It will be done, my king." His face was a mask of stoic duty. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest. His first official quest. A real one. He stood, his movements jerky, and bowed as he had been taught. "I will do my best, your majesty," he declared, his voice a little too loud in the suddenly quiet hall. A few knights exchanged skeptical glances. Lancelot and the strange green boy? It was an odd pairing, to say the least. But the king's word was law. The journey west was a lesson in contrasts. For the first day, they rode through the vibrant, rolling hills of Arthur's domain. The sun was warm, the sky was a brilliant blue, and the air was filled with the song of larks. Lancelot was a consummate professional, silent and watchful, his dark eyes scanning the horizon. Izuku, on the other hand, was fighting a losing battle with his steed. He had been given a gentler mare named Willow, far less judgmental than the warhorse Stonewall, but his horsemanship was still atrocious. He bounced in the saddle with every trot, his posture a study in awkward angles. "You ride like a sack of turnips, Sir Izuku," Lancelot commented after several hours, the barest hint of a smirk on his lips. It was the first thing he had said all day. "I'm sorry!" Izuku yelped, clutching the saddle horn as Willow stumbled slightly. "In my homeland, we don't really use horses. We have metal carriages that move on their own." Lancelot gave him a long, sideways glance. "Another tale from your magical Japan? It's not magic, it's science," Izuku mumbled, before realizing the futility of explaining the internal combustion engine. Never mind. As they rode, their differing worldviews became starkly apparent. They passed the ruined watchtower, and Lancelot immediately began assessing its strategic value, its defensive weaknesses. Izuku, meanwhile, was estimating the force required to cause such damage and wondering about the people who had lived there. By the second day, the landscape began to change. The vibrant green of the countryside muted to a dull olive. The air grew still and heavy, and the birdsong faded, replaced by an unnerving silence. They had reached the borders of the Whisperwood. "The blight begins here," Lancelot said, his voice low. He dismounted, kneeling to examine the grass. It was brittle and gray, crumbling to dust in his gauntlet fingers. Izuku dismounted as well, his boots crunching on the dead turf. A profound sense of wrongness permeated the air, a feeling he'd only ever experienced in the presence of All for One. It was a feeling of life being actively, malevolently negated. He walked to the edge of the forest, and placed a hand on the trunk of a great oak. The bark was cold and clammy, not with damp, but with a deep, unnatural chill. There were no insects crawling on it, no moss growing in its crevices. It was a corpse. "It's not just dead," Izuku began to mumble, his mind kicking into its familiar, analytical overdrive. "It's like the energy has been sucked out of it. The cellular structure is intact, but the biological processes have just stopped. If it were a normal disease, there would be signs of decay, fungus, rot. But this is sterile. Clean, like a battery that's been completely drained." Lancelot watched him, his head tilted. He had seen Merlin fall into similar trances of concentration, but the wizard's mutterings were of runes and celestial alignments. This boy spoke a different language entirely, one of cells and energy and processes. "What are you muttering about, boy?" Lancelot asked, his tone more curious than condescending. "The sickness," Izuku said, turning, his eyes bright with focus. "The Reeves said the people fade, they grow weary but don't die. This forest isn't rotting, it's just empty. It's the same phenomenon. Whatever this creature is, it doesn't kill. It feeds. It's draining the life force, the bioenergy, from everything around it to sustain itself. That's why the effect is so widespread. It's not a curse, it's a parasitic ecosystem." Lancelot stared at him. He understood maybe half of the words Izuku had used, but the conclusion was chillingly clear. "It eats life itself." "Exactly," Izuku confirmed. He then pointed to the ground. "And look," he was pointing at the tracks. They were large, cloven, but shallow, as if whatever made them was unnaturally light for its size. More disturbingly, the dead grass around the edge of the prints was even more desiccated than the surrounding turf, as if the very touch of the creature was anathema to life. "The villagers called it a walking shadow," Lancelot recalled. "We must be cautious. This is sorcery of a dark and powerful kind." "It's not sorcery," Izuku countered instinctively, then stopped himself. "In this world maybe it was. I mean, its power follows a pattern. It has rules. If we can understand the rules, we can beat it." A flicker of respect entered Lancelot's eyes. He was a man who understood rules, the rules of combat, of chivalry, of honor. The idea that even a dark monster might be bound by its own set of principles was a novel one, but it resonated with his warrior's logic. "A sound theory, Sir Izuku," Let us see if it holds true. They pressed on, leading their horses through the silent, gray woods. The atmosphere was deeply oppressive. The silence was a physical weight, broken only by the crunch of their boots on dead leaves and the occasional creak of a brittle branch groaning in the wind. It was a dead place, haunted by the memory of life. They reached the village of Oak Haven by dusk, and it was a grim sight. The houses were well kept, the thatched roofs neat, but there was no smoke rising from the chimneys, no children playing in the dirt road. A handful of villagers moved about like somnambulists, their faces pale and drawn, their movements slow and lethargic. They stared at the nights with hollow, hopeless eyes. Alaric met them at the entrance to the village, looking even more frail than he had in Camelot. "My lords," he croaked. "You came. We are here to help," Izuku said, his voice full of a warmth and conviction that seemed utterly alien in this drained world. The old man seemed to draw a sliver of strength from it, straightening his back a fraction of an inch. While Lancelot organized a patrol around the village perimeter, establishing a watch for the night, Izuku went to work. He asked Alaric to take him to the sickest villagers. He entered their dark, quiet homes, kneeling by their bedsides. He didn't have medical equipment, but he had his senses and his mind. He checked their breathing, shallow, their pulse, thready and slow, their skin temperature, cold to the touch. It wasn't a fever, not a plague. It was a slow-motion power-down. He came out of the third hut, his face grim, and found Lancelot waiting for him. "They're hibernating," Izuku said quietly. "Their bodies are shutting down all non-essential functions to conserve what little energy they have left. But they can't last forever. We have to find this thing, tonight." Lancelot nodded, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "I have found its tracks. It seems to have a hunting ground, a circuit it makes around the village. The trail is freshest to the north, leading deeper into the woods." "Then that's where we go," Izuku said, his jaw set. They left their horses in the relative safety of the village and ventured into the Whisperwood as true night fell. The moon was a sliver of silver in the sky, offering little light through the thick, dead canopy. Lancelot moved with a preternatural grace, a shadow of steel and leather, his senses honed by a lifetime of war. Izuku, using a low-level full cowling to enhance his own senses, followed close behind. The forest grew darker, stranger. The trees were no longer just dead. They were twisted into unnatural shapes, their branches like grasping claws. A faint, foul-smelling mist clung to the ground. Then they heard it. A soft, rhythmic clicking, like dry bones knocking together, and a low, whispering sound that seemed to come from all around them at once, a sibilant chorus of dead leaves and dying wishes. They broke into a clearing, and their blood ran cold. The clearing was the heart of the blight, a circle of absolute death. The ground was not soil, but a carpet of gray ash. The trees at its edge were blackened and gnarled, resembling tormented sculptures. In the center of this dead space stood the source. It was a thing of nightmare. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, a horrifying mockery of a man crafted from withered roots, splintered bone, and strips of what looked like dried sinew. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in claws of sharpened wood. For a head, it had the bleached, antlered skull of a great stag, and from within its empty sockets burned 2 points of malevolent, crimson light. It was the less hen from the old tales, a corrupted guardian of the forest, a cancer of nature, and in the center of its chest, embedded in the gnarled cage of its wooden ribs, was a pulsating, obsidian heart. A totem. It was a shard of black, crystalline rock, etched with jagged, glowing red runes. With every slow pulse, a wave of visible sickness seemed to ripple out from it, and the whispering on the wind grew louder. "God preserve us!" Lancelot breathed, his hand tightening on his sword until his knuckles were white. The less hen turned its skull head towards them. There was no sound, but they felt its voice in their minds, a cold, dead weight of pure malice and insatiable hunger. Lancelot did not hesitate. With a battle cry that shattered the oppressive silence, he charged. For the king and for Camelot, he was a blur of righteous fury, his legendary blade, a rondite, a streak of silver moonlight. He met the creature head-on, his sword clashing against its woody claws with a shower of sparks. He was magnificent, a perfect warrior, his every move a testament to his peerless skill. He ducked under a sweeping blow and thrust his sword deep into the Lishan's leg. But Izuku, watching from the edge of the clearing, saw it happen. As Lancelot pulled his blade free, the deep gash he had created began to writhe. New roots and vines, black and thorny, grew at a supernatural speed, sealing the wound in seconds. The creature was completely unharmed. "Lancelot, your sword is useless!" Izuku yelled, his mind racing. "It's regenerating! The totem in its chest is the source of its power." The less hen, ignoring the minor wound, swung its other arm like a scythe. Lancelot brought his shield up just in time. The impact was titanic. The sound of wood on steel was like a thunderclap, and Lancelot, the strongest knight in the realm, was sent skidding back several feet, his shield arm trembling. The forest itself came alive at the creature's command. Thorny roots, thick as a man's arm, erupted from the ashen ground, trying to ensnare Lancelot's legs. He hacked at them with his sword, but for every one he severed, 2 more would grow. A cloud of black, biting insects swarmed from the creature's back, forcing the knight to fall back. Izuku knew he had to act. This wasn't a fight Lancelot could win with skill and steel. It was a puzzle that needed a new kind of solution. "Lancelot!" Izuku shouted, activating full cowling at 30%, green lightning crackling around him. "I can destroy the totem! But I need a clear shot! You have to draw its full attention." Lancelot, parrying another crushing blow from the less hen, glanced back at Izuku. He saw the crackling energy, the fierce determination in the boy's eyes. He saw the only path to victory. There was no hesitation, no questioning. Only trust. "Do it!" he roared, a grin of savage joy spreading across his face. He was no longer just fighting a monster. He was playing his part in a greater strategy. He was the shield, and the boy was the spear. Lancelot planted his feet and let out a defiant bellow. "Come then, you foul scarecrow! Face the wrath of Camelot's first knight!" He abandoned all defense, launching into a dazzling, ferocious offensive. He was no longer trying to wound the creature, only to occupy it. He ducked under its claws, his sword a flashing arc aimed at its skullhead. He slid between its legs, hacking at the roots that tried to ensnare him. He was a dervish of polished steel and unwavering courage, a magnificent, impossible distraction that held the full, murderous attention of the less hen. It was the opening Izuku needed. He took a deep breath, focusing his power. He couldn't get a clear run at the creature with Lancelot so close. He needed a different angle. He needed to go up. He crouched low, channeling the power of the sixth user, and float. For Lancelot, locked in a life-or-death struggle, it was as if the laws of nature had simply broken. He saw a flash of green from the corner of his eye, and then Sir Izuku was simply rising. He ascended into the air, not with a jump, but with a smooth, controlled levitation, the green lightning around him intensifying as he rose above the grasping, dead branches of the trees. He hung there for a moment against the moonlit sky, a verdant constellation of raw power. Lancelot's jaw went slack for a fraction of a second in pure, unadulterated awe. From his vantage point, Izuku had a perfect view. The totem in the Lishan's chest pulsed like a malevolent heart. He pushed one for all, channeling more power than he had dared to use since coming to this world. He felt the familiar, fiery strain in his muscles as he surged past 40%. "One for all, full cowling! 45%! He yelled into the night sky, his voice echoing through the dead woods. He gathered the crackling green energy into his right arm, the air around his fist distorting with the sheer concentration of power. He angled himself downwards, a human meteor aimed at the heart of the blight. "Delaware smash!" He didn't flick his fingers. He punched the air itself. A massive, concentrated cannonball of emerald green kinetic force shot from his fist. It screamed through the air, leaving a shimmering trail in its wake. The less hen, still focused on the knight at its feet, had no time to react. The blast of pure power struck the obsidian totem dead center. There was no grand explosion. There was an implosion. A sound like 1,000 panes of glass shattering at once. The red runes on the totem flared violently, and then went dark. The black crystal cracked, spiderwebbing into a million fissures before dissolving into black dust. The less hen froze. The red light in its skull eyes flickered and died. A low, mournful groan escaped it, a sound not of a monster, but of a great, ancient tree falling in a storm. The bonds of dark magic holding it together dissolved. The creature of root and bone crumbled, collapsing into a heap of dead wood, bleached bone, and withered vines, which quickly disintegrated into a pile of harmless, gray ash. As the creature fell, a final pulse of energy washed out from where the totem had been. But this pulse was not black and draining. It was a soft, green wave of pure life force, the stolen energy of the forest, finally released. It washed over the clearing and out into the woods. Izuku, hovering in the air, watched in amazement. A faint, green blush returned to the leaves of the trees at the edge of the clearing. The cold, oppressive silence was broken by the chirping of a lone cricket. Life was returning. The strain of using float and a 45% smash simultaneously hit him like a physical blow. His energy reserves plummeted. He dropped from the sky, landing in a clumsy roll on the ashen ground, the last vestiges of full cowling sputtering out. He lay there, panting, his arm aching, every muscle screaming in protest. Lancelot stood in the center of the now empty clearing, his chest heaving, his sword held loosely at his side. He was covered in scratches and grime, his shield dented, his breathing ragged. He stared at the pile of ash, then looked up at the moon, then down at the exhausted boy lying on the ground. He slowly sheathed his sword, the sound loud in the returning quiet of the forest. He walked over to Izuku and offered a gauntlet hand. "You can fly?" he asked, his voice breathless with a mixture of exhaustion and utter disbelief. Izuku took the offered hand, and Lancelot pulled him easily to his feet. "It's called float," Izuku gasped, leaning on the knight for support. "It's another aspect of my quirk. It takes a lot out of me." "An aspect of your quirk?" Lancelot repeated slowly, as if committing the strange words to memory. He looked at Izuku, and for the first time, all traces of skepticism, of amusement, of noble condescension were gone. In their place was a profound and unshakable respect. "Ah, you are truly a marvel, Sir Izuku," he said, his voice quiet. "The greatest marvel this world has ever seen." The journey back to Oakhaven was a stark contrast to their grim trek-in. The forest felt lighter, the air cleaner. A soft green was already beginning to suffuse the gray bark of the trees. When they arrived, they found the village stirring as if from a long sleep. Color was returning to the villagers' cheeks. A baby was crying, a sound of life that brought tears to the old Reeve's eyes. They rested for a day before starting their ride back to Camelot. The silence between them now was not one of professional distance, but of comfortable companionship. "That power you wield," Lancelot said as they rode, breaking the silence. "The green lightning. It is a fearsome weapon." "It's not for fighting," Izuku replied, his voice firm. "It's for saving people." Lancelot looked at him, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips for the first time. "Perhaps they are not such different things after all, my friend." He spurred his horse on, and Izuku, with a newfound, if clumsy, confidence, urged Willow to follow. They were two knights, returning from a successful quest. One was the greatest swordsman the world had ever known. The other was a boy from another universe. And on the road to Camelot, under the light of a dawning sun, they had forged a bond not just of mutual respect, but of true friendship. A bond that would soon be tested by the gathering shadows around the throne. Miles away from the sun-drenched courtyards and bustling halls of Camelot, on the storm-lashed Isle of Avalon, a different kind of power held court. Here, in the black heart of the fortress of Cernin, the stones themselves wept with ancient, wild magic. The air was perpetually cold, smelling of ozone, salt water, and the bitter perfume of herbs that grew only in the dark. The only sound was the eternal, thunderous roar of the sea crashing against the jagged cliffs below, a symphony of rage and sorrow. In the highest tower, in a circular chamber where the very air seemed to shimmer with arcane energy, Morgan Le Fay watched the world through a mirror of her own making. It was not glass, but a great, shallow basin of polished obsidian, filled to the brim with water drawn from a subterranean spring that had never seen the sun. The images that danced on its surface were not reflections, but echoes of reality, smoky and dreamlike, captured by her will. She watched the final moments of the battle in the Whisperwood, her long, pale fingers tracing the rim of the basin. Her face, a mask of aristocratic beauty framed by a cascade of raven black hair, was unreadable. She saw the lass hen, a creature of her own lesser enchantments, a simple test, crumble to dust. She saw Lancelot, Arthur's prized dog, standing exhausted but triumphant. She dismissed him with a contemptuous sneer. His strength was predictable, a simple, brutish application of steel and piety. He was a known quantity, a problem with a known solution. But then the image in the scrying pool shifted, focusing on the other figure. The boy. The Emerald Knight. A flicker of genuine fury, cold and sharp, sparked in her dark eyes. She watched him descend from the sky, a living comet of green energy. She felt the ghost of his power, even through the veil of her magic, and it was an infuriating, terrifying enigma. She, Morgan Le Fay, was a scholar of power in all its forms. She could read the ley lines of the earth, command the spirits of air and shadow, and bargain with the ancient, nameless things that slumbered in the deep places of the world. She understood the golden, ordered magic of the so-called divine, the silver, chaotic power of the Fae, and the red, primal rage of draconic bloodlines. Every magical signature in the world was a song she knew by heart. But this boy, his power was a chord she had never heard. It was a cacophony that defied every law of her craft. It was not woven from the elements of the world. It did not borrow from the Fae, nor did it petition the heavens or the hells. It seemed to spring from within him, a self-contained furnace of impossible energy. It was raw, it was violent, and worst of all, it was pure. There was no trace of ambition in it, no lust for power, no darkness on which her own magic could gain purchase. It was the antithesis of her very being. An anomaly, she whispered, her voice a silken hiss that was almost lost in the roar of the sea. A variable that does not belong in the grand equation. For a week she had been seething, watching him through the pool. She saw him in the training yard, his movements an unnatural, disciplined blur. She saw him in the library, his brow furrowed in concentration. She saw him at the round table, an infuriating blot of sincere, guileless green amidst the burnished steel of Arthur's puppets. Her brother, the Boy King, saw him as a symbol of hope. Morgan saw him as an existential threat. Her meticulously crafted plans to unravel Camelot from within, to poison the trust between Arthur and his knights, to exploit their greed and their pride, all of it could be undone by this one, unpredictable boy whose heart seemed incorruptible. But every fortress has a weak wall. She had tested his physical strength with the lass hen, and he had shattered it with casual, overwhelming force. A direct confrontation would be foolish until she understood the limits of his strange quirk. No, the next test had to be more subtle. She could not break his body, so she would have to break his mind. A slow, cruel smile curved her lips. A heart so pure is a fragile thing, she mused to the swirling waters of the pool. It is not shielded by cynicism or ambition. It is an open wound, susceptible to the poisons of guilt, fear, and sorrow. She leaned closer to the obsidian basin, her reflection a pale, predatory mask. Her fingers, tipped with nails like shards of onyx, dipped into the cold water. She began to whisper, her voice weaving an incantation in the old tongue, a language of power that made the very stones of the tower tremble. The water swirled, not with images of the present, but with the shadows of fear and memory. She was not creating a monster of flesh and bone this time. She was crafting a key, a lure specifically designed for the lock of a hero's heart. A phantom woven from sorrow, cloaked in innocence, and hungry for despair. Go! She commanded the darkness coalescing in the water. Find the little green knight. Find the cracks in his soul and tear them wide open. Show him what his heroism truly costs. The shadow in the pool detached from the surface, slithered over the stone floor like a spill of black ink, and vanished into the walls of the fortress, on its way to Camelot. In the tower, Morgan Le Fay leaned back, her eyes gleaming with triumphant malice. The game had just become far more interesting. In Camelot, the late afternoon sun cast long, peaceful shadows across the courtyard. The air was filled with the familiar sounds of life, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer, the distant laughter of squires, the lowing of cattle being brought in from the fields. Izuku was making his way back from the library, his mind buzzing with the strange, beautiful script of an ancient text on herbal remedies he'd been trying to decipher with Merlin's help. He felt a sense of belonging. It was a fragile, tentative feeling, but it was there. Gawain would greet him with a booming laugh and challenge him to a footrace. Lancelot would seek him out for quiet conversations by the battlements, a silent acknowledgement of their shared adventure. Even Sir Kay's insults had become more frequent and less venomous, a sign Izuku was learning to interpret as grudging acceptance. He was beginning to carve a small space for himself in this impossible world. As he passed the shadowed alcove near the old armory, a sound cut through the peaceful din. It was the sound of a child crying. It was a soft, choke sound, full of a misery so profound it made Izuku's hero instincts flare to life instantly. He stopped, his head tilting, and followed the sound. Tucked away in the shadows, almost completely hidden, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her dress was a simple, homespun rag, tattered and smudged with dirt. Her feet were bare, and her face was streaked with tears and grime. She had her face buried in her knees, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Izuku's heart went out to her immediately. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her, and knelt down. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice gentle. "Are you all right? Are you lost?" The little girl looked up, her eyes wide and startlingly blue in her dirty face. She flinched, as if expecting a blow. I can't find my mama," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We were at the market, and there were so many people. I turned around and she was gone." "It's okay, we'll find her," Izuku said reassuringly, offering her a small smile. "What's your name?" "Elara," she sniffled. "Well, Elara, my name is Izuku. I'm a knight. It's my job to help people who are in trouble. Why don't you and I go look for your mama together?" A tiny flicker of hope sparked in her tear-filled eyes. She gave a hesitant nod. She pointed a small, trembling finger down a less traveled corridor. I think she went this way. Towards the old cellars. Papa works down there sometimes, with the wine casks. It seemed a strange place for a woman and child to be, but the castle was a labyrinth, and Izuku didn't know all its secrets. "All right," he said, standing up and offering her his hand. "Lead the way." Her small, cold fingers wrapped around his. Her hand felt unnaturally frigid, but he chalked it up to fear and the chill of the stone corridors. He followed as she led him away from the bustling main thoroughfares of the castle, down a series of narrower, dimmer hallways. The sounds of the courtyard faded behind them, replaced by the echo of their own footsteps. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp stone and dust. The torches here were spaced further apart, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe at the edge of his vision. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Izuku asked, a prickle of unease beginning to form at the back of his neck. His danger sense, a finely honed instinct from 100 battles, was starting to hum at a low frequency. "I'm sure," Elara whispered, her grip on his hand tightening. She tugged him forward, down a flight of steep, winding stone steps. The air became noticeably colder, and the smell of earth and something else, something like old bones and forgotten memories, grew stronger. They were descending into the foundations of the castle, into the catacombs. At the bottom of the stairs, a heavy, iron-banded door stood slightly ajar. Elara let go of his hand and scurried through the opening. "Mama?" Her small voice echoed in the darkness beyond. Izuku hesitated for a fraction of a second. Every instinct was screaming at him that this was wrong. This was a trap. But the sound of a lost child's voice overrode his caution. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped through. He was in a vast, subterranean chamber. The ceiling was low, supported by thick stone pillars that stretched away into darkness. Empty burial niches lined the walls, black, gaping mouths in the ancient stone. The air was frigid and utterly still. "Elara?" he called out, his voice sounding small in the oppressive silence. He heard a faint giggle. It was not the sound of a happy child, but a thin, cruel, echoing sound that scraped along his nerves. He turned and saw her. She was standing 20 feet away, but she was no longer the small, pathetic girl. She was taller, her form indistinct and wavering like heat haze. Her blue eyes glowed with a faint, predatory light. Then, behind him, the great stone door slammed shut with a deafening, final boom. The torches in the corridor outside were instantly snuffed out, plunging the catacombs into absolute, impenetrable darkness. The trap had been sprung. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any noise. It was a perfect, tomb-like silence. Izuku couldn't see, couldn't hear. He was completely cut off. He immediately activated full cowling at 5%, the familiar green lightning flaring to life, providing a small, eerie circle of light. The phantom was gone. He was alone. He moved to the door, placing his hands on the cold stone. It was solid, ancient, and magically sealed. He could probably smash it down with a 20% smash, but he hesitated. He didn't know the nature of this trap. A blind use of force could make things worse. He needed to think, to analyze. That's when the whispers started. They came from the walls, from the darkness, from inside his own head. Faint at first, then growing in clarity. And they spoke with familiar voices. Izuku? Honey? Why did you leave me? He froze. It was his mother's voice, thick with tears. An image flickered at the edge of his light, his mother, sitting alone at their kitchen table, her face buried in her hands, a single uneaten bowl of katsudon growing cold. Mom? He whispered, his heart clenching with a sudden, agonizing pang of guilt and homesickness. I chose wrong, my boy. This voice was deeper, more powerful. It was All Might's voice. Izuku spun around, and the illusion coalesced before him. All Might, in his skeletal form, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, his eyes full of a terrible, profound disappointment. I passed my power to you, and you ran away from your world. You weren't ready. The burden was too great. No. Izuku breathed, taking a step back. No, that's not true. I didn't run away. The illusion of All Might faded, replaced by others. Uraraka, her usually bright face twisted into a mask of cold accusation. We needed you, Deku. The villains are still out there. And you abandoned us. Ida, his armor dented, his expression rigid with anger. Your actions were illogical and selfish. You deserted your post. Todoroki, his face impassive, but his eyes burning with a cold fire. You left us to fight your battles. The phantoms of his friends circled him, their whispers weaving a net of guilt and shame around him. He knew they weren't real. He knew it, but the magic was insidious, preying on his deepest insecurities, the fears that haunted him in the quiet hours of the night. Had he abandoned them? Was he a coward for not finding a way back? You are not them. He gritted out, clenching his fists. You are just an illusion. A dry, rasping laugh echoed through the chamber, and the air grew colder still. The illusions of his friends dissolved into dust, and a new one formed. This one felt different. More real. More powerful. It was Tamura Shigaraki. He stood there, his lanky frame draped in his black coat, his gray hair obscuring his face. The air around him seemed to decay. They always said you wanted to be a hero, Izuku Midoriya. Shigaraki's voice scraped. But what is a hero? Just a person who breaks things in a prettier way than I do. You smash walls. I decay them. What's the difference? The illusion shifted. He was no longer in the catacombs, but back in the ruins of the Paranormal Liberation Front's headquarters. The ground was littered with bodies, heroes and villains alike. Sir Nightingale lay at his feet, a hole through his chest, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. Look at them, Shigaraki hissed, gesturing to the carnage. This is what your saving looks like. You punch and you kick and you break. But you can never protect everyone. Your power is just a tool for destruction. Every time you win, someone still loses. Someone still dies. You just get to decide who. The phantom of Bakugo appeared, impaled by All for One's attack, coughing up blood. Why couldn't you save me, Deku? He rasped. This was the final blow. Izuku's carefully constructed defenses crumbled. The images, the voices, the accusations, they were all his own deepest fears, given form and voice. He fell to his knees, the light of full cowling flickering as his concentration shattered. He clutched his head, a choked sob escaping his lips. The whispers intensified, a vortex of despair swirling around him. The phantom, its true form now a coalescing mass of shadow and weeping faces, began to feed on his anguish, growing stronger, more solid. He was losing. No, the voice was not from the catacombs. It was from within. It was calm, gentle, and unyielding. It was the voice of a woman. He was suddenly no longer in the cold, dark tomb, but in the familiar, quiet space within One for All. He stood in the gray, misty void where the vestiges resided. Before him stood the spectral form of a woman with a kind face and a small mole under her mouth. She wore a simple, dark hero costume. Nana Shimura. Listen to me, Ninth, she said, her voice a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. That thing out there, it feeds on fear. It gorges on your guilt. The more you fight it with anger, the more you struggle with despair, the stronger it becomes. But it's right, Izuku choked out, his spectral form wavering. I couldn't save everyone. I failed. Every hero fails, Nana said softly, her ghostly hand resting on his shoulder. The touch was impossibly warm. That is not what defines us. Do you know where a hero's true strength comes from, Izuku? It's not in these arms. She gestured to his powerful limbs. It's not in this quirk that we pass to you. Power is just a tool, a hammer. You can use it to build a house or to shatter a skull. The power itself has no morality. She smiled, a sad, wise smile. Our real strength, it's in the heart. It's the will that guides the hammer. It's the reason we get up after we fail. That creature is showing you your fears. It is using your good heart against you, twisting your love for others into a weapon of guilt. Do not let it. Acknowledge the fear. Accept the guilt. But do not let them rule you. Her form began to fade. Do not fight the shadow, little one. Show it the light. Izuku blinked, and he was back in the catacombs. The phantom was now a towering figure of solidified despair, its form vaguely humanoid, its face a swirling vortex of weeping eyes and screaming mouths. It loomed over him, ready to consume him. But something inside him had shifted. Nana's words echoed in his soul. Our real strength is in the heart. He slowly, deliberately, let the green lightning of full calling die. The darkness that rushed him was absolute, but it no longer felt threatening. He got to his feet, his body trembling, not with fear, but with a new, quiet resolve. You're right, he said, his voice clear and steady in the blackness. He was speaking to the phantom, to the illusions, to himself. I am afraid. I'm terrified that I'll fail, that I won't be strong enough to protect the people I love. I feel guilty for every person I couldn't save. That pain, it's real. He took a step forward, into the heart of the oppressive aura the creature radiated. But that's why I have to be a hero, he continued, his voice growing stronger. That fear is what drives me. That guilt is a reminder of what's at stake. It's not a weakness. It's my reason for fighting. The phantom let out a confused shriek as Izuku walked towards it. It had been expecting him to fight back, to lash out with his power. It was prepared for anger, for hatred, for defiance. It was not prepared for this. Izuku stopped just before the shadowy mass. He could feel its cold, sorrowful energy washing over him. It was a creature born of pain, sustained by pain. He didn't see a monster anymore. He saw a wound. He raised his hand, not balled into a fist, but open in a gesture of peace. You don't have to be this, he said softly, his voice full of an empathy so pure it was like a physical light in the darkness. You are just an echo, a collection of sadness, but you don't have to cause more of it. You can rest. The creature recoiled as if struck. This was not the fuel it needed. This was not fear or anger. This was acceptance. Compassion. It was poison to its very existence. It let out a long, wailing cry, a sound not of malice, but of release. The vortex of faces spun faster and faster, and then the entire shadowy form unraveled. It dissolved not into dust, but into motes of faint, silvery light that drifted through the air for a moment before fading into nothing. A profound silence returned to the catacombs. And then, with a deep, grinding groan, the great stone door slid open. Torchlight flooded the chamber. Standing in the doorway, his long robes a stark contrast to the ancient stone, was Merlin. The wizard's violet eyes were not filled with surprise, but with a deep, ancient understanding. He took in the scene, the empty chamber, Izuku standing alone and unarmed in the center, the lingering traces of powerful magic dissipating in the air. A sorrow eater, Merlin said, his voice a low hum that seemed to resonate with the stones. A wraith woven from fear, sent to test the spirit. A creature few could face, and fewer still could vanquish. It was Morgan Le Fay, wasn't it? Izuku asked, his voice hoarse. Her stench is all over this place. Merlin confirmed, his gaze sharp. She could not challenge your power, so she sought to poison your heart. A foolish endeavor. I almost fell for it, Izuku admitted, the lingering phantom pains of the illusions making him shudder. But you did not, Merlin countered, stepping into the chamber. Any of Arthur's knights could have entered this room and tried to shatter the phantom with brute force, and they would have failed, their own fears turning their strength against them. They would have fought the darkness. He stopped before Izuku, his ancient eyes filled with a new level of respect. You, Sir Izuku, are perhaps the only one who would have thought to save it from itself. Merlin placed a thin, cool hand on Izuku's shoulder. You have passed a test far greater than any trial of arms. You have faced the shadows within your own soul and answered them not with a sword, but with your spirit. Do not forget this lesson. The greatest battles you will fight in this world may not be against monsters of flesh and bone. Izuku nodded, a profound exhaustion settling deep into his bones. He was shaken, he was weary, but he was not broken. He was stronger. He understood now that the enemies in this land of myth and magic were not just external threats. They were insidious, they were cunning, and they attacked the very thing that made him a hero. He had survived his first encounter with the shadow of Morgan Le Fay, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that it would not be his last.